listener production.
The creators of this podcast would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which it is recorded. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are the first storytellers of this land. We pay respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, as well as any Indigenous people who may be listening today.
Hello and welcome to TOFOP with Friends. I'm Charlie Clausen and I'm very happy to be joined by the Chasers, Chris Taylor. Welcome to the show.
It's so good to speak to you, Charlie. I haven't seen you or spoken to you. How long would it be?
Well, I was trying to think about when we actually first met, and I think it was in the corridors of Triple J when you and Craig started your today, tomorrow. Two T's.
One of the above. Today, it was called. I have a feeling of you and I starting at Triple J around the same time. Craig Rucastle and I, were doing the drive show. We only did it for 2 years, unfortunately, but it was like one of the most blissful 2 years of my life. And were you like on the front desk? I was you way overqualified receptionist at Triple J's youth station.
I interned at Triple J, it felt like, for 2 years. I sort of came in a side door when Charlie Pickering had his show and he asked me to do a segment on it. So I can't even remember what the segment was. It was like I think a pop culture related segment. And then when Charlie left, Mel Bampton asked me to do her show. And so I was doing another segment on that. And then in between, I was so broke, I said to the guys at Triple J, if anything needs cleaned or fixed, just I'll do it. Right. So they put me on the front desk. So yeah, I was answering the phone. I think there was, I don't know if it was your show, maybe it was Will and Adam. There was a controversial take done at some point in which I had to man the front desk when a bunch of riled up, the 2GB listeners were calling the desk to complain about some joke that had been made.
Look, it could have been us, or it could have been Adam and Will. It could have been Zanro, for all we know. She was such a controversial
Richard Kingsmill just went off on a tear one night.
The one I remember, I don't know if it was this one. It was my first introduction to the dangers and the extraordinary sensitivity of discussing Scientology on air. I can't remember the jokes, but it was probably just Scientology 101, just teeing off on the ludicrousness of it all, and maybe a bit of Tom Cruise here and a bit of John Travolta there. But the mic break itself is sort of irrelevant to the discussion. What the takeaway that I remember, and that I remember involving the whole office and very possibly you on the front desk, was that not within half an hour of us talking about Scientology on air did a parcel arrive, hand-delivered to the front desk, and the person didn't, say who they were. They just said, "Can you please give this to Chris and Craig?" And so we got off air and the receptionist handed it to us. And it was just, all it said on the envelope was, "For your interest." And we opened it up and it was just a whole lot of literature about Scientology. Like there was no letter or kind of, "Hey, back off." But what was fascinating to me about that was that they're massive Triple J fans and just happen to be listening, or they've got very sophisticated media monitoring that they could not only be alerted that someone was sort of bad-mouthing them on the national radio, but then also had the resources and infrastructure to get a courier to hand out some literature to correct the record. It was the most big brothery sort of thing I've ever gone through, that, someone's listening and they're not liking it, but in a very passive-aggressive way. There was no "please back off." It was just "for your interest." And it still gives me the chills.
I got fascinated with Scientology. Like, being an actor, the first time I went to LA, I remember I was hanging out with this girl who grew up in LA. She's an LA native. And I had a lot of questions about, because, you drive past the Scientology Center and, obviously so many famous actors are Scientologists. And I remember being out with her, we're at dinner or maybe having drinks somewhere public. And I had all these questions and she was getting edgy. I could see like she didn't like me talking about it. And I was like, what's wrong? And she's like, you just don't know. You just don't know who's listening. And there was this whole kind of like secret police kind of thing. Yeah. And then I had another mate who was in a short film in Australia that was made by some Scientologists, and it went and played a whole bunch of festivals in the States. And he went over and was hanging out with all these Scientologists, and he said it was so interesting because he saw a pathway forward for himself if he wanted to accept L. Ron Hubbard into his heart and soul, or whatever the process is, because there were so many connections he made. Like, he went out to dinner, and there's a very famous director and there's a very famous actor, and he had access to all these people simply by being part of this community. And he said, it really made me think, if I wanted to kind of accelerate my career in Hollywood, this would be a really good first step. And from that perspective, I'm like, okay, well, if you could sort of work out a way that you weren't going to lose all your money and be like, cleaning toilets as an unpaid intern or whatever they make you do.
Unless you did the calculation and go, how much more would I earn through the contacts how many more Hollywood jobs would I be getting versus how much is the church asking me to, pay them on a monthly tithe or whatever it is. To me, I'm sure like me, you think about religion a lot and sort of what draws people to it and sort of thing. And I've always had Scientology in a slightly different category, but the way you just talked about it then, I can completely rationally understand why someone might use it if they think it's career advancement, if it's just emboldenment of a community and sort of belonging to a community that will then help you professionally. I can understand that. I don't know if that works in Australia. It clearly seems to be something in Hollywood.
We don't have the star factor. Well, like most things, we're lacking that big name.
Is Rebecca Gibney not really asking people to come to meetings?
Kate Sobrano. I'm not sure who the other big wig Scientology celebrities are in Australia.
Kate Sobrano's the one in Australia, isn't it? There's always surprising ones you hear. Like it was like deep into my fandom of Beck that I learned he was a Scientologist through John Safran, who did that great program about music jamboree and
well,
religion.
this same friend of mine was saying, like, you could do, like, they would post notices up, at the Scientology Centre of, like, acting workshops. And it's run by, and I don't know if he's a Scientologist, but as an example, like William H. Macy is running, like, a weekend workshop, and it's $10 to go in. And so you can see, like, a lot of advantages. I mean, every religion, I was raised Catholic, and there is that community aspect to religion. Like my mother, I'm the youngest of 9, like Irish Catholic family, and about half my family's gay. My mum was a very liberal-minded, Catholic, but the actual community aspect of it was what drew her to it. Even though she'd questioned the church and there's a lot of things she disagreed with, ultimately when it came down to it, like, Sunday she would see her friends, they would go and get, tea or coffee after church. There was all these community events. So I think for a lot of people, it's the belonging. Like, I think the dogma and stuff is a certain thing. And, whether or not, like, I mean, it's sort of hard for me to think that, like, what a silly religion is Scientology, but what a perfect religion is, like, Christianity. I mean, they're all a bit silly,
of course,
in the end.
Of course. That's a really good point. Like, you're sometimes splitting hairs between, they've all got equally fantastical sort of origin stories.
Yeah.
And
my imaginary friend is better than yours.
Yeah, I guess it's the presence of aliens and spaceships and our knowledge of the slightly sinister way in which it was set up, and the psychiatric tricks they use, and as we said, the sort of things we're talking about, like the Catholic Church. I mean, sort of don't want to go down a big rabbit hole of analysing all the flaws of the Catholic Church, but you never get the sense that, going back to my original story, that if you teed off, you did a mic break on George Pell or whatever it was, that you'd then get literature waiting for you.
Yeah.
There was just there's something about as I said, firstly their media monitoring, but their recruitment processes are left field. Now, that's not to say they're worse or better than other religions, but it's a whole new box of tricks. And unlike a lot of other religions, it doesn't necessarily do what it says on the tin. Like, it's never Church of Scientology, join here. It's always free personality test. Now, to someone who's vulnerable, there's no mention of religion in that slogan. There's just, someone's offering to help me. I'm vulnerable at the moment. I'm going through some anxiety, whatever it is. So there's sort of a very deliberate deceit at the gate, and then the slow drag in. And I don't think that is common to all religions. I think a lot of, if you go back to traditional missionary work, it was very much, no, we're here representing the Church of Latter-day Saints or whatever it was, and it was very much transparent. And even Hillsong, that's not an untransparent. We can talk about its business model and, its various indiscretions and all of that, but very, chest beating, cards on table. We are a religion, and we're here to make you rich. That's their sales pitch. Whereas the Scientology sales pitch is we're here to heal you. We're here to make you feel better. It's a really interesting mix of sort of psychoscience, medicine, and religion, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I actually did the IQ test, the entry-level test that you
free
meant to
IQ
do.
test is the other sales pitch.
Yeah. So I was pretty much the same trip where I was sort of like way into Scientology, or at least finding out about it. And I was killing time.
Is this whole podcast, are you going to recruit me at the end of this conversation?
We've got other things we could talk about, but I don't know. I do find it fascinating. I mean, I find sort of, I guess being raised Catholic and sort of been exposed to it, like I find the whole, because there are similar patterns to all this stuff. And you're right, like that idea of we can heal you is very similar to the Catholic thing of, you know, you were born in sin, you know, and that you're basically.
But that's more, we can save you. We can give you eternal life. That's the promise.
But there's a lack, right? It's you sort of you are
you're wanting
operating from a place of need, you know. And when I did the IQ test, it was interesting because it was only like, I'd say, a year after that episode of South Park had come out. And I don't think there's been any more damaging, you know, influence on Scientology. Like the amount of Scientologists I've seen interviewed, or ex-Scientologists, I should say, who talk about that episode was an eye-opener for them. Like, how did these guys know what the, 7 thetan levels were and the way they exposed it so quickly when, the way the church is structured is that they reveal these things. Like, you're only allowed to sort of like go into a secret room to look at the sacred texts or whatever it is. So when I did
a video, I always think it's like a video game when I hear about these different levels, and that, like, if you're rich enough, you're really good at the game and you get to the end game of the whole thing. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the other things, right, why it brings in so many celebrities, is that your wealth or your success or your fame is kind of evidence of someone who is doing it correctly. It's a reward. Whereas I'd say with Christianity,
and if you have money, you can game the system, because it's basically a money opens doors, business model, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if to be the most righteous or the best Scientologist, you just need money, really, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Or incredible amounts of fame, or influence, because that's valuable to them as well. But that IQ test, so it's literally like a giant sort of, sheet of paper, like you would see in a science fiction film or even like a science documentary from the 60s. Like, you'd feed it to the computer, just one of those long sheets of paper with about 100 multiple choice questions that you fill out with a pencil. And the questions were sort of, I don't know, like really a bit vague and sometimes like sort of non sequiturs, things like, you find an injured bird on the street. Do you A, ignore it, B, take it to a vet, C, crush it, D, whatever. And so it takes about like 40 minutes and you fill out all these answers. And then.
So even that's interesting, because that's not an IQ question. That's clearly trying to assess some sort of psychological.
Ethical or, yeah. And
yeah.
So then they fed those answers into like, again, like a 1960s science fiction machine. Like, it didn't look like any computer that I recognized. Right. But I knew that I was just sort of waiting, and I knew that whatever the results were going to be, something was going to be lacking. And so, because we'd had a bit of a chat before I did the actual multiple choice, and I told her that I was an actor and blah, blah, blah. And so when the lady brought out it was now a graph that sort of showed peaks and troughs of my personality, she was like, well, you're an excellent communicator. Clearly, you work in a profession where you have to talk for a living. But down here, you're lacking in self-esteem and blah, blah, blah. It was like the horoscope kind of thing. And so she said, I would recommend we do this introductory course. It's however many dollars, 6 weeks. You can do it here. And I just said, can we just jump straight to the end? I said, like, who's Xenu? What's this whole thing about like thetan levels and, spirits being dropped? Because I'd seen that episode of South Park. And I could see.
She wouldn't have liked that?
No.
Am I guessing right? Yeah.
Yeah, she didn't get upset, but she was just trying to pump the brakes a bit. And she's like, whoa, that's a lot. No, you've got to start at the beginning. You can't, you're trying to.
That's course 8.
Yeah, exactly. You're trying to get right to the end, but you don't, what you're understanding. And then I said to her, but that episode of South Park, and then that's when she got annoyed.
Right.
And she's like, well, that's not. They weren't, they're making fun of the religion. I said, yeah, but is it true? Like, do you believe in an alien who dropped ice blocks containing people's souls into volcanoes, which then got released into, a prehistoric man, and that's why we've got these spirits trapped inside us? But it never got.
And what was the answer?
No, she just was encouraging me to sign up for a 6-week course, which is where we left it.
And you never did.
I never did. No,
did.
But I've watched so many documentaries on it, and I do find the whole thing so. Like, is it just a case of it's too new? Like, sort of other established traditional religions have been around for so long, and their form of mysticism is not science fiction.
It's interesting that ancient wisdom gets a bit more of a leave pass.
We give it a bit of a leave.
And you sort of touched on this earlier. There's lots about religion at its purest when it's just following sort of because it's Christianity I'm talking about now, the teachings of Christ about, helping the poor, giving food to the starving. Like all of that stuff is very hard to object to. And this is real Father Bob stuff, just, proper, charity, proper helping the needy, which is basically what Christ was going on about for most of the Gospels. How that then pivoted literally 180 degrees to, oh no, self-enrichment is more important than helping the poor, which is where we are with the Pentecostal sort of movement, where it's all about, if you believe in God, you will forget about entering the kingdom of heaven. You will enter the kingdom of earth, and you'll have money. And I have a lot of trouble with that. That's where I start to feel smart people are using religion and people's willingness to believe and belong to actually turn a dollar. And I don't think the original ideas of religion were about that. It was about, as I said, 180 degrees the other way of giving, the whole Mother Teresa, giving up everything to help those who need more.
Yeah, I went to a Jesuit high school, and they had a scholarship you could apply for in your summer holidays where you could go to India and work with some missionaries over there. And so I applied and I got this scholarship. And at the time, I remember I was going through a bit of because I loved being a Catholic when I was a kid. I often say it was like my first exposure to showbiz, like you'd go to church and the priest would be up on the altar, which is like a stage, and everyone's listening. There's like a rapt audience. There's music.
Absolutely. And deliberately, it is a show. Yeah.
Costumes, the whole bit, and so I was very much
Songs.
into it. And then obviously, you sort of hit your teens and you start becoming a bit more cynical and, you inquire about the world a bit more. And so I was completely convinced that God didn't exist and that I didn't believe in God, and the whole thing seemed like a waste of time and it was so corrupt and blah, blah, blah. And so in my interview for this scholarship, that's what I told them. I thought religion was corrupt. But Jesuits dig that. I mean, that's Jesuits, in terms of the Catholic Church, they've been excommunicated 5 times in their 500-year history because they like to challenge. A lot of them are intellectuals. They'll have professional degrees. They like to push and inquire. And in fact, when India got its independence, they kicked most of the missionaries out, apart from the Jesuits, and I think the Lutherans were the only other denomination that they kept. So when I got to India and I started working with these different priests and these missionaries, it was exactly what you were saying before about the Father Bob philosophy. So I was expecting Bible bashing, preachers, the whole kind of bit, but it was the opposite of that. In fact, if anything, it was more just like community service, where they would, for instance, I stayed in this place in Bihar, where there was 2 villages that had traditionally not got along, but they were sort of had this kind of tense relationship. They shared resources. There's a river that went between the 2 villages, and so this priest came and said, well, we need to work out a way to pool our resources and work together. You both need wells. You need a church. You need a school. So we'll build a school. And so once they got these kind of community projects in place, they would bring everyone together on a Sunday and they would just have like town meeting where everyone would sort of air their concerns about, we need access to this road, or, we need, access to this on this day or whatever. And then at the end of that, the priest would say, hey, look, if you're sort of enjoying this spirit of cooperation, there was this guy called Jesus Christ and these were his beliefs. But there was no ritual to it. There may have been some prayer, like a prayer to close the meeting or whatever, but it was not indoctrination, at least from what I saw. If anything, it just seemed like it had been absorbed into the culture of the specific villages and the specific people, celebrating. And I remember sort of being all inspired by that and being like, oh, because also in India too, with so many religions and, people don't sort of save their religion for a day of worship, or for a specific day.
It's every day.
Yeah. You'd get in a bus, there's like idols everywhere. The people will take time to pray. But then when I came back to Australia and back to my private school, and saw that you had, friends of mine, their parents behaving with like complete impunity, but then going to church on a Sunday and sort of washing away their sins just with this very symbolic, and the whole thing felt very hypocritical to me. And I was like, oh, okay. So in my head, I was like, well, there is a place for religion, but it's not the religion that I know in the West or that I grew up experiencing. I think there is a place for it, but it's more in practice than it is about scoring points by attending like the right place at the right time.
I'm sure we have sort of secular versions of that now. Like I think everyone has a pretty keen sense of morality and where we might diverge, here and there in our execution of that. I think, even like, online social activism and all of that is a type of religion in that it's people trying to bring good into the world. And you can sort of paint it as politics or activism, but it is kind of, there is overlap with religion to an extent because it's about belonging. It's about proselytizing and evangelizing a certain point of view. And you often see modern political movements, especially like, sort of the so-called woke movement, compared to a religion. I'm sure you've read articles about that where, it's quite fanatical. It's quite intolerant at times of pluralism and all of that kind of thing. And
I can't say anything anymore, Chris. I don't know if you know. You can't say anything anymore.
You can't. No. Am I still on?
Yeah.
I don't want to go down that discussion, but it's. I think what they're in a very simplistic way is what they're sort of observing is that the same human need to do moral good. In the modern secular digital age has just morphed into something else. Righteousness is as old as, is as old as time, and it just is taking on different forms. So, and again, that's possibly why it's a little bit hypocritical of outspoken atheists like me and other to be as harsh on religion, because in a way everyone's just sort of kind of on the same mission, if I can clumsily use that word. They're just using different means and different ideologies to sort of arrive at the dual two things I think we strive for to lead a good life, and that's to be as good a person as possible and to improve the world as much as we can in our eyes. And whether you do that through a religious group or a church or through an online movement or whatever it is, it's kind of the same end game.
Yeah.
In terms of an objective. If I sort of explain that, or is that a bit facile?
No, I think that makes total sense. I mean, it's that idea of where do we get our morality from? Are we inherently moral people, or do we need religion as the guideposts? And I think that for a lot of people who are religious, or at least grew up religious, because it's all you think that, well, I need those moral bumpers either side of me, otherwise the ball will go into the gutter. But I think for people who were not, like my wife was not raised with any particular religion, and she's a very moral person, she can determine right and wrong quite easily. And I think that, like, when I go to, because I haven't been to church a lot since I stopped going to church regularly, but when I do go in, it feels archaic, like there's only old people in the church. I'm sure there's some young people around, but predominantly it feels like, especially in the West, like I know it's thriving in parts of like South America and in Africa as well, but in the West, it's been, like you say, I think split over so many different kind of purviews. People can give back to the community through other social programs,
many ways.
Which saves you Sunday morning, which is also, which I think is a win-win.
Yeah. No, it's I was this is sort of tangentially related, and it's fresh in my mind because last night I'm always very slow on catching up with TV shows and stuff. My wife and I just finally watched the second part of the Israel Folau documentary that was on ABC. Did you see it? Right. It was actually a very good bit of work by Nell Mention. And it was interesting. It seemed to be hated online. I had a little scan of Twitter, and everyone just resented the very idea of giving prominence to Folau, who they regard as a bigot. But it was actually a much more nuanced, very sophisticated look at the genuinely thorny issues and the balancing of rights involved in that incredibly thorny, difficult saga. But what I'd never really thought about at the time it all unfolded, but what I thought about watching the show last night, and this brings us back to our conversation, is the huge anger on behalf of the gay community, the LGBT community, was the post saying, that among a large list of people that are going to hell, homosexuals was one of them. And I sort of found it interesting that there was so much anger that really only is warranted if you buy in to the concept that there is a hell. Like, it's not like saying, I hate gays, I think they're disgusting. People who say gays are going to hell. Now, that's only an offensive statement, really, if you buy into the very hypothetical and very contested notion that hell exists. If, like me, you just think hell's just this ridiculous construct of the church as a way of scaring people into acting in a certain way while they're living on earth, then that message to me just comes across more as silly than as hateful. It's like it's an Old Testament scripture. He was quoting a scripture. Do you know what I mean? Like it.
Yeah.
It's. I mean, of course it was, and I'm not for a second wanting to undermine the hurt or whatever that felt, but I just thought it's not. Is it hate speech if you don't even agree with the premise of the speech? Because if he's basically, it's like you saying all Chaser members won't get onto the alien spaceship that will go into the, like, it's, well, no, oh shit, damn, we miss out on. He's just invented something. Well, the Bible's invented something that he's supported. I'm saying this quite clumsily, but I think the point I was trying to make is it was the easier way to dismiss that post is just to reject the very ludicrousness of the existence of hell and the idea that we either go to one place or another when we die. Now, I know we obviously, I absolutely understand behind the sentiment is a genuine regarding of homosexuals as somehow not equal to heterosexuals. And I guess that's what's informing the hate. I just wondered if I'd be interested if some people who did read that post did reject it just on the pure grounds that it was, well, I don't believe in hell, so I'm not troubled by that statement.
Well, I think atheists would, but I mean, there's queer Christian community. That would be the people you would ask to ask, because that is a direct attack on their system of belief. I mean, if you are a queer Christian and you believe in the concept of heaven and hell, then it is an attack on you, and it is also, I guess, isolating one group of that Christian community to say that, you know, it doesn't matter how hard you worship or how good you are, that, you know, you're going to go to hell.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with you, but, you know, we're in a privileged position of not having like skin in the game, you know, like neither religious nor queer, so it doesn't affect either.
I only enter debates where I have no skin in the game, Charlie.
It's the safest way.
Like, isn't that what punditry's about?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're right. And look, you know, I've got a lot of Christian mates, and I'd say half of them believe in heaven and hell and half don't. I think that's a very sort of, you might say, an Old Testament thinking. Yeah.
I'm living up in the Northern Rivers, and so, like, you know, it is, you talk about your alternative life philosophies. Like, there is so many things up here that I've learnt, and I wish, like, I've never had a supernatural experience in my life. I've had like kind of, you know, sublime experiences or things that have, you know, affected me emotionally, you know, and great coincidences and stuff. But I've never had that moment where, you know, I've seen a ghost or a voice has come to me and you know, given me solace in a time of need or anything like that. And I'm always really fascinated to talk to people who do 100% believe in psychics and do believe in all this kind of stuff, because I'm like, I would love to think that there was some kind of other force out there that, you know, there was a balance of power out there that I could maybe appeal to or influence, and somehow that would have a direct impact on my life. But I'm too cynical. And I'm always told by these people that, well, your issue is that because you refuse to believe, you will never see evidence of this alternate world. And it's like, but I don't feel like the onus should be on me to prove its existence. Like, shouldn't it come to me? Why is all the pressure on me to be so willing to accept all this stuff? Like, give me I don't need to see much, Chris. I just want to meet a psychic who nails it, you know, without like no cold reading, just like they shake my hand and they just tell me my exact name and, you know, all that kind of stuff, because that would be brilliant.
You need to see more of Mullumbimby while you're up in the Northern Rivers. There'd be a woman in a tent somewhere with the right set of cards or crystal ball.
Well, there's a whole festival. It's called the Starlight Festival, a 3-day festival up here where it's all kind of, you know, psychics, and they'll photograph your aura and they'll do dowsing, And so I went along with my wife and my brother. And, my wife, like, she can take or leave it. She for her, she likes hearing an alternative viewpoint because it helps her think about, her life. I still, after 20 years of being together, Chris, I still haven't quite cracked if she's a genuine believer or not. She throws enough kind of like, ink in the water to fool me.
That's a puzzle you don't want to crack too early. Like, you've got a good 30, 40 years left.
Yeah, hopefully.
More. If you're living the dream up in Byron, you're probably very healthy. You've got 70 years left on this planet. I reckon you want to say, it's like you don't want to solve a cryptic crossword in the first 10 minutes. You want to tease it out over a weekend. You want that not to be solved until, that's deathbed stuff.
Yeah. Well, so she went and she booked in with this psychic. And so I said to my brother, you know what, like, it's fun. We're at Luna Park. We're just going to go around and look at the attractions. And I'm just going to sit down and I'm going to have a session with someone. And I'm just going to stop being such a cynic kind of, skeptic. And so I started talking to this. I can't remember what the particular form of psychic interaction I was going to have. Like, I don't know. I'm not like that literate on what kind of specific reading I was going to get, but I was just talking to them. Like, I couldn't make it through like a minute of talking to them because I'm like, this is like, I bullshit for a living. Like, I talk for a living. And, if I was put on the spot and I had to give you a psychic reading, I reckon I could do a pretty good job. I think like there's some people out there who are fantastic at, intuition, body language, all these kind of things. And from that, they can form a pretty accurate picture of who you are. But it sort of comes back to what you were saying about, Scientology and taking advantage of people's willingness to believe in something. I'm sure there's psychics out there who genuinely believe, that their natural intuition and ability to read people is some kind of higher power. But I also feel like if you're going to monetize it, then I want to see some peer-reviewed data.
I want juice. I want
some, because otherwise it could be, like kind of a self-regulated psychic industry, Chris. We need some kind of standards, don't we? Benchmarks.
Well, I'm always really interested in the concept of faith in its literal sense. I was having a beer with a mate the other day. And he said, I can't remember who we were talking about because I can't believe that guy's a Christian because he's really smart. I said, what are you talking about? Like, smart people can be Christian. He goes, but, surely you've got a rational mind. You sort of like you're saying, in the absence of evidence, what smart person could possibly believe in a God or anything? I said, no, but I reckon in a way there's a really sophisticated emotional intelligence that I envy in a way. An emotional intelligence that lets someone have faith, because faith is literally the ability to believe in the absence of evidence. They know there's no evidence, and they have taken a leap of faith that there might be, that there is in many. And I can't make that leap. But gee, sometimes it looks rather lovely if you could.
Doesn't it?
Wouldn't you love to have fun?
Chris,
isn't it awful being a rational fuckwit?
Just to believe, like in something, and
to believe.
I am not saying that there isn't something else, but I don't believe that with our monkey brains we are able to articulate the complexities of what happens to consciousness, after we leave this mortal body. Like, there may very well be an afterlife or a form of existence beyond this. But I don't think that we have, especially not 2,000 years ago, we had the means to articulate what that is. And such hard and fast rules, Chris, handed down from on high about when you can eat meat and so forth.
All of that.
And I'm like, how does this relate to the other part? I don't understand.
And that's the bit that's the turn-off, isn't it? It's how people sort of invent religions to control a people or a population and go, these are the rules, we're in charge, we have all the lovely goblets and art and we'll create the rules that you have to follow, and that's a turn off for me. But the simple act of believing that there might be a heaven, I can't do it. It just seems silly and unprovable to me, and in the absence of evidence I choose not to believe. I guess what I'm saying, what I said to my friend is I don't think it's a symptom of a lack of intelligence to have faith. It might even be a symptom of a greater emotional intelligence or a greater humanity. or you're just hedging your bets. I mean, that's sort of, again, the cynical side of me, that you're kind of keeping your options open. But there's okay, cards on table, Charlie. Like, would you prefer there to be an afterlife? Because I don't even know if I want one. I'm so grateful to be alive, and really always, every now and then just pinch myself, go, I was one of the eggs and the sperm that got through, and I've got this life, and I've done some really fun things with it. I've been incredibly privileged and lucky. And once that merry-go-round stops, I think I've just, count my blessings, done. If you tell me, oh no, there's a whole new eternity, I go, oh God, that sounds like work.
Ever.
And you can never get off. No, you can never get off. But it's really cool. Like, there's harps and angels, and I go, well, how much ice cream is there? As much as ice cream as you want. The idea of eternity freaks me out. I like life because it's finite. I know. We all want a long life, and we do what we can in terms of exercise and health and eating to have it as long as possible. But I don't know. Do you agree? Like, the idea of eternity is not a good sales pitch to me. That just sounds like a chore.
Yeah, I mean, the idea of even prolonging life, scientists saying, we've isolated the aging gene. I'm like, why? Why? I feel like we've been designed for the perfect amount of time, and even then we've probably boosted that by an extra 20 years to what we should be around for with diet and, the way we take care of ourselves now. When I think about death, and I've been talking to my therapist a lot about it lately. My father died when he was only like 15 years older than I am. So he was 60 when I died. So I was 10.
Right.
And, being a father now, I think that.
Is that scary to you?
Yeah, I didn't realize it was. It sort of just came up recently in a session where, I sort of started to realize, because I'm not scared of dying for myself, but I'm scared of, having lived
not
through
being there for your child, or
what's left behind. And I was lucky; I had a big family, and I was very well looked after and stuff. But ultimately, your dad's gone, and being a father now, I'm like, oh God, I just would hate to, for my daughter to get to 10 years old, and then I get sick, and then I die, and I've been working through this kind of idea of, well, what can I do to take action on that? I take care of myself. I eat well. I don't smoke. I've sort of limited all those kind of categories. I mean, my father died from a very complex series of illnesses. It wasn't any one thing. He had an infection in his intestine, and then they tried to remove that, but then that operation got botched, and then he caught pneumonia, and it's a whole just a cavalcade of just horrible things just piling up on top of each other. But then it sort of got me thinking in reverse, which is more about what you're saying, which is you've got a limited amount of time. And so how do you make the most of it? And, I'd say ordinarily, people would look at us and, you're a recent father as well. And although we're kind of old for fathers, I think the technical term is we're geriatric parents, because I think once you get over, is it 35 or something like that, you are classed
probably
as a geriatric.
Probably.
But, I think that, from the outside, you'd look at that and go, well, there's nothing to say that you won't watch your children grow into adults. But there is a sense with me that's okay, this is good. It actually helps me center back on the job of being a parent. And, you've just done the 7th season of Birth, Baby and Beyond with midwife Kath Curtin. And I listened to the first episode, and I really identify with everything you said in that very first episode.
That was about IVF and infertility. Did you have a bit of a journey there?
Well, we did IVF because we were classed as geriatrics, because we assumed that we were going to...
You just assumed you'd need it. You didn't...
Yeah, we assumed we were going to need it. And then a drunken Christmas party resulted in the conception of our daughter. It was actually much easier than we'd anticipated. Yeah. And so we had but we'd seen friends, struggle as well, and some friends not even be able to conceive at all, which is just, so heartbreaking. But then the actual role of what a father is, and how you can be there for your partner during pregnancy and then through the birth. And I talked about a lot with Osher. We did a parenting podcast for a few seasons, and it was basically a live diary of the first 2 years of us being dads. Great. And the thing that kept coming up to me was I just felt so useless. I just felt you were really a support crew in a way. And there was but there was also elements of ego about it, which I had to wrestle with. Like, the fact that my wife could settle my daughter more easily than I could. The fact that, when she called out for anyone, she would call out for my wife. And, I do a lot of stay-at-home parenting as well. Gemma will travel for work quite a bit. And so often it's just me and my daughter. And I'm like, well, surely like the credits are building up. But there is a different relationship that my daughter has with my wife. And that's perfectly okay. But it's finding my place within that while also dealing with, the way parents were a generation before us, or the way our parents parented was very, very different. Still part of that kind of, the father would traditionally just go off and work and
straight back to work the minute you were born, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas now it's much more hands-on. And so you become acutely aware of the influence you're having on your kid. And for me, I'm acutely aware of the role model I'm being for men, for my daughter, because that's what you do with kids, is that you are creating for them like an archetype. And I have, I initially was having issues with not anger, but like my memories of my father growing up was he had 9 kids, so he had a lot on his plate, and so he was quite stressed. My memories of him were always, he was like very tightly coiled, like he just seemed tense all the time. Like, I understand that now to be anxiety.
He had 9 kids, he's allowed to be tense.
Yeah, he's allowed. But the effect that it had on me was like, I was a bit scared of him, not like he was a loving dad and, we had wonderful times together, but there was an element of like, is he going to be upset? Like, I don't want to ask him something if it's going to piss him off. And so I started to see aspects of that bleeding into my own parenting. It's as much as you'd be like, I'm not going to be anything like my dad. Like, I would get anxious and tense, and I've only got 1 kid, Chris. Like, it was. Like,
how old are you? How old?
She's 3.5, turns 4 in September.
Yeah, right. Isn't that interesting? Like, I find this fascinating because, especially with a whole lot of recent timely debates about, male toxicity and all of that, and finally the world being told the great secret that we all knew, that men can be assholes and men can treat women appallingly, in their dating years and all of that. And then you find you have yourself a daughter and you're the first reference point to being a male. And I think you need to be absolutely, as you describe it. I think the role of a father is different. You're not there to be emblematic of manhood, but you are her first impression of what a man is. And I guess it's really interesting. I'd be interested in your thought. Are you saying you actually kind of shape your behavior around her with that in mind, that somehow you are giving her an impression of how men behave, and if you do show anger, that could leave a lasting impression that all men are angry, or is it more? So are you really carefully watching your behavior and deliberately calibrating it around her, or is it? Yeah,
it's more. I think it was more unconscious. It was more that my daughter was born during the bushfires, then COVID happened, and then we moved up the Northern Rivers during the floods. So it's been like a kind of tumultuous first 3 years.
Biblical time.
And so there was a lot of like stress. I actually kind of got to a point last year where, and I've been in and out of therapy for years. I think it's, I'm not embarrassed of that. It's been a lifesaver for me in many ways. And I started to sort of see some red flags, early, which was like, I was doing a lot of solo parenting last year, and it was, during the floods, and there was a lot of stress going on. And I just, that anxiety and tension was building within me, and I was just lashing out a bit, and she was sort of at that age too of just sort of coming out of her twos, where just getting her to sleep, just getting a bit more independent. And so there was just a lot of kind of like resistance. And so I just was like, I need to go speak to someone about this and find out like how a healthier way to deal with this frustration and sort of anger that I'm feeling. Because I felt also like I was failing, any night that I couldn't get her to sleep on time, any night where she would refuse dinner, all this stuff. And like, this is my fault. This is my fault. If I was a better father, like none of this would be happening.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? And it's sort of, you touched on this earlier about how men feel I don't know if emasculated is the word. It's probably not the word, but the less important, the less useful of the two parents. And it's so interesting because, men, the fuckers traditionally, very alpha. Oh, no, I've got this. I'll fix the fence. I'll make the dinner. I'll do the Barbie. And then suddenly, for the most profound thing they've ever been called on to do, which is be responsible for another human being, the woman is better equipped. And it comes down to feeding. It's the breastfeeding, which is such an amazingly bonding experience. And I get envy of my wife that I don't get to breastfeed. I've got man boobs. I give it a crack.
Well, you could just be a very poor meal.
Very bad milk. Yeah, to be full of piss and wind and beer. But it's a really. It's a very sort of sobering lesson for a man to sort of go, oh, you're not the most useful guy around here. And then to hear, I want mummy, or mummy settles better than daddy. And yeah, can be crushing for a male ego like you and me. But then I think it's unhealthy to say it's we're doing something wrong. From what I've understood from all the medical experts I've either spoken directly to or read it in through books, is that it's a very human thing, and that the man isn't a bad parent. It's just inevitable when they're that young and breastfeeding. They have that attachment. I got it last night. My baby's only 7 months now. She's gorgeous. Completely made our lives. We just feel very complete and happy to have her, and she's an absolute charmer. But yeah, we were at the point now where if my wife needs to go and, do something like have a shower or something, she'll give it to me, give it. I'm a great dad.
Birth Baby and Beyond, available now on the Listener app. You can listen with your it.
Yeah, some babies are human, some aren't. She'll give her the baby and immediately waterworks, just screaming, just the handover because she's got so clingy. And yeah, there's a version of you that takes it personally, and then there's the rational version that kicks in and goes, oh no, it's just she's formed as per evolution, a bond that I'm told does change over time, and it actually fathers become incredibly important for
Everyone
daughters.
keeps saying that to me.
When does that kick in, Charlie?
All my girlfriends keep saying, oh, don't worry, she'll become a daddy's girl. And I'm like, when? It's been 3.5 years. And here's the ranking. I'll give you the ATP rankings, Chris. It's mum, number 1, daughter, number 2, and then daylight, and then dad comes in. And if there's an animal in the house, if a friend comes around with a dog gets the 3rd spot, and then
they take the podium finish. You're not even on the podium, right?
No, I'm being dramatic. It's just, I think a lot of it is almost evolutionary in a way, or very primal, because when it's just my daughter and I, it's fine. We get on like a house on fire.
It's only when there's the option in the room. When it's just you and the daughter, it's best friends. Yeah, it's like let's make a buddy movie. It's the best. It's really cool.
We were joking, my wife and I, last night, because our daughter gets jealous when we try and even communicate, not even get affectionate with each other. But if we're just having a discussion where we're making eye contact, and she gets the sense that, I need to assert some kind of dominance. And so she'll get in front of her mum and just remind her mum that she's there. And it's this has to be some kind of hard wiring, it's got to be some kind of instinctive response, because she has not been raised, with anything but love and attention. She's a very safe, warm, loved child, but she still feels the need that, oh, hang on, this guy feels like the big bloke's trying to take her away from me. I need to just reassert some kind of dominance here.
Do you know, I agree with all of that, and I haven't really had a chance to talk with anyone else, any other geriatrics. So I was,
start our club.
I go to our parenting.
Me, you, and
Osher,
the geriatric dads.
Is Osher a geriatric? Oh, good.
Yeah,
okay, we should start a support group or something. But no, I am older than the other dads in our parenting group, and certainly older than the norm.
Because that discussion around, are you too old to have kids, or, my daughter was born when I was 42, but even that, is considered geriatric. And then, this idea of me having these kind of subconscious thoughts about, well, my father was only 60 when he died, and, that left a 10-year-old without a father, which is all true. but I'm still here now, and I think I've had a pretty amazing life. You know, it's not like the love evaporates with the death of one parent. It's tragic, and you don't want it to happen. But families are more than just the kind of binary, you know, of what we think of.
Of course they are. You know, the moral argument they say, oh, you don't want to leave a young child with the trauma of going through grief and stuff. I'd kind of argue grief is traumatic whatever age you are. Like I'm about to lose my father. My father's very close to death now, and I'm going to be like wiped. I'll be absolutely devastated. You know, maybe it's harder for a child, you know, to grow up, if they're really young, just to grow up, you know, without a dad maybe. But it's sort of denying the adults their equivalent grief. I kind of think whenever your parent dies, it's a pretty hard thing to go through, as you could speak to.
100%. I mean, well, I've lost both my parents now, one as a child, one as an adult. And I would have sworn that, like, it's funny, people get upset when I say this, but I think that losing my father young actually was not the worst thing in the world in terms of like my grieving process, because children are very resilient and they are very flexible and they can adapt to new situations quite quickly, provided there is ample support around them. And I had that because I still had, you know, 8 siblings and a mother and, you know, extended family and community and all that kind of stuff. But it felt like, I always think that because I've experienced quite a bit of death, you know, through friends and family in my life, that every time I have another death, that I'll be prepared this time. That like, oh, I can outsmart it. I've outsmarted. I understand, you know. And like, it was funny. I've talked about, you know, my father so much in so many different mediums and stuff. And if you had asked me, you know, about it, I'd say I'm over it. Like, it was 30-something years ago, and you know, I've analyzed it from every philosophical and, you know, intellectual standpoint, and that holds no emotional weight for me anymore. And then, like, the first session with this new therapist, she brings up my father, and I start bawling. Right. And it's like, oh shit, that stuff, like, it just lingers with you. And then, you know, the same thing with my mother. Like, you know, she had quite the opposite. She had quite a beautiful death, you know, died at home, surrounded by her kids, kind of the way you want to go out. But it's still like, death is death, and each individual, like, even, and this is going to sound like I'm trivializing it, I swear I'm not, but even when my dog died, like, that was probably the most upset, like, I had been over a death in a long time. And I think it's because, like, we got the dog when we first got together. He was as much part of our relationship as anything. And so when that dog died, it was like part of our relationship, you know, had died. And, you know, I remember sort of talking to my sister about it, because I was like, I feel so ridiculous that it's, you know, I'm still so upset about my dog. And she said, yeah, but, you know, they are members of the family, and the hurt hurts just as much. It just doesn't last as long. And I think that's borne out over time. I don't sort of think about my dog as often. Although, having said that, if you will look around my house, there are 3 framed photos of my dead dog, and only 2 of Gemma and I on our wedding day. He dominates proceedings in this house. Right. But yeah, so you're right though. Like, death, I don't think that it's like, oh, you know, it's going to be so much more traumatic. It may be, but it also may not.
It may be less. It may
be less.
Yeah, it's not something you can, you know, stridently.
There's not a scoreboard system for this stuff.
No, I know, that's the stupid thing, and it's, you know, like, you know, it's why I almost think I should stop reading op-ed pieces. Like, I read them to get angry and to disagree with them, but it's such a hollow sport having an opinion on things, and it's always going back to what you and I are doing. It's always people with no skin in the game mouthing off about things, and sometimes I don't even think it's their fault. I think it's the business model of print, such as it exists these days, or online, forcing people to have opinions on things that they probably don't really feel that strongly about, and you know, and the stronger the opinion, the more clicks and all of that. So,
and it's so profitable too, just to kind of like cast these opinions out there.
Yeah, I've got to say, look, no one else has raised it with me. Maybe because it's a delicate issue. This is the idea of being a geriatric. no one on the medical side, there was nothing, no one cautions you against it. And I'm not Al Pacino either. Like, isn't he 83
You can still
or
pick your
something?
kids up.
I've got a couple of years left. Like, he's going tomorrow. Like, it's the more interesting debate that it starts getting closer to is, and this is a discussion very few people have, and we don't even have it on our podcast because our podcast is more about the nuts and bolts of just how to be a parent. But the really interesting question I don't think we prosecute enough is, why do people have children? What are their motivations? Is it, I think the historical traditional reason was just that's what we did. That, we culturally, family was really important, and people who didn't have family was somehow regarded more suspiciously or inferior, and that's appalling, but that's how it was. And that takes us back to religion a bit. I think that was very much a sort of traditional religious model of the family being a very, very important part of society. There's the great paradox of parenthood is that I think it is in part motivated by a selfishness, a desire to not create a version of yourself. I think that there might be pure narcissists for whom that is a motivation. I don't think that's most people's motivation. I think they're signing up for something really cool. It's like, everything. If you ever speak to a parent, after all the tedious jokes about, I don't have any sleep, I don't have a life, I've never go out to a restaurant, when you clear all that off the table, they're generally always gushing and beaming and having an extremely rewarding, positive time. How many people have you seen in their later years, on a Parkinson type show, asked about what are you most proud of? And it's always kids. Like, and so there's the selfishness of wanting to buy into that experience and understand what that experience is, and to enjoy all the rewards and satisfaction of being a parent. And then the paradox kicks in, because having been motivated by selfishness, you then suddenly need to surrender all yourself to become the most selfless person for the first time in your life, to live and to prioritize another human being over yourself in a way that I like to think I'm quite a good husband, but it's a whole new level. Like, you literally live for your child, and your job,
they
your
literally
job
live because of you.
they literally because of us, but your job is to keep them safe and comfortable, and you can only do that as a great act of selflessness. And I find that duality really, really interesting, that we sometimes go into it because we think, oh, this will be cool, so I'll get something out of this. And then the minute it arrives, all those things are true, by the way. It is delightful and it is really fun and rewarding. But it only works if you give up so much of yourself. And I think some people struggle with that. I've actually found it incredibly helpful. I'm happy to admit, you're my therapist today, Charlie. So this
Right,
is,
okay.
Send me the bill afterwards. Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to admit, I'm quite self-centered. I've always, I'm quite very independent, the sort of person that very happy on their own, and sometimes even prefers living, eating, going to movies on their own, all of that, and sort of just live too much in my own head. It's been incredibly useful, and this is not the reason I did it, but it's this amazing byproduct of becoming a father. It's been incredibly useful to shed a bit of that and to realize, oh, no, I was being an arsehole, just, always waking up each day and going, what am I going to do today? And the essential shift for me has been, that's no longer the question I ask. It's, what can I do for my daughter today? And I'm not saying I'm a better person. I'm not giving myself points or anything. But as a way of becoming less self-absorbed, there's nothing quite like being responsible for another little human, isn't there?
No. I mean, I often say that it's almost like forced mindfulness, because when you have that thing in front of you, that thing, you called it I'll call it a thing.
We're great dads.
Birth, baby, and beyond,
parenting
available.
podcast.
but when because I think that the thing I struggled with the most was that internal chatter, that negative, that judge that I was doing things wrong. I couldn't settle her, I couldn't feed her, like all those things that I felt like I was doing wrong, and I literally just had to pivot my perspective and be like, well, this is not about winning this situation. It's about being present in this situation, So, because it's, a child screaming because it doesn't want to go to sleep. It's just the most horrendous sound. And you really it makes sense that you just want to get out of there. Like that, it triggers something in you that's like, this is unpleasant. I don't want to be here. But what I've managed to do is go, okay, she was only like an infant for 9 months, and then she was a toddler, and now she's like a girl. And so I'm getting these little brief windows that I will never get back. And so it's a great way to ground yourself and go, I will just sit with this, like her being upset and screaming at me for 20 minutes before she goes to sleep is actually a small price to pay for the absolute joy I feel when she finally does go to sleep and she's lying there and she just looks like an angel. And it's like, all these things will pass. Like when you're in the middle of a tantrum, you feel like this is the most horrendous thing and I'll never be able to get through it, but it always passes. These feels, and kids too also, like, they're just like volcanoes of emotion. Like they're just experiencing things for the first time. Like they don't know how to regulate any kind of impulse or emotional. And so my mistake was to take that as some kind of failing on my part, that my child didn't immediately know like how to behave or that it should go to sleep or whatever. But I'm just trying now to accept the fact this is part of the process. In the same way you might view a creative process as being, well, I've got to fail at this a bunch of times before we get the show up on its feet and it's ready to put in front of an audience.
But in a way, it's not even like the creative process, because most, generalization, most creative processes, you generally exert an element of control.
Yes, that's right.
And the script is a knowable thing that you can, modulate. And as you said, these little things are volcanoes of illogic. You can't control them, and you shouldn't. And so you're not failing. You're just struggling to deal with something that's happening on its own timeline. I think it's a very human thing to characterize it as failure because the closest things we have to compare it to are always like that. So whether it's even a relationship with another adult, you can fail at that. I'm not sure you can, if you're doing everything that you sound like you're doing, it's just so wrong to characterize that as failure, because the kid's an unknowable,
and what's the scoreboard?
Rocket of instinct.
You can't fail. Like, because when are we checking the scores? Is it when she's 7, when she's 18, when she's 30? You know what I mean? Like all these things are like just tiny little events of a day, which will then pass. And it's now sort of at a point where like, I actually genuinely love doing, all the kind of chore type stuff like baths and bedtime. I like it because it really is just a chance for me to be with her and she's in her element and there's no agenda to it. Like I'm not trying to get her to daycare, we don't have to, get to it's just her in her element and I'm just an observer, and she sometimes doesn't want me. Like she's often is like I'm weirding her out by standing in the doorway. Like, she wants to play on her own or with her friends or whatever. And so she's developing that independence, but it's just trying to remember that like the cliche of it all goes so fast, but it does. We just had a book made of all the iPhotos, photos we took on our iPhones of the first 3 years. We've got put into a photo album and I flicked through it.
And it's like my wife's iPhone, and that'd be like a 20,000 page book.
Yeah. But it was just like, you look at that though, that 3-year period condensed into just like a photo album essentially. And it's like, wow, that was just, my memory of it was so dense. It was so much, but then you have these fleeting memories. So it's like, I want to try and remember as much as I can. And that means you have to actually remember the bad stuff as well. It's not an eternal sunshine where I can just erase the bad parts, because you've got to take the good and the bad.
On memory, the favourite sort of game my wife and I like playing, it's not really a game, it's a question. And I'll ask it to you. Do you think it's good or bad that we don't have any memories of our life as a baby? Like, like memory doesn't really kick in till 4 or 5 years old. And I always think, our little daughter Rose, we're giving all these amazing experiences. She's not going to remember this. And I go, oh, wouldn't it be cool if she remembered that time I, rubbed ice cream all over her face or whatever it was? And I kind of go, it's how weird would it be if you could remember like being born and remember your first bath? It'd be. Part of me even thinks there's a movie in it or something like there's the idea that, we all, it's a bit sci-fi, that we all actually, memory kicks in from day one and that, and it goes to, even as a sort of academic question, it goes to all these things we're discussing about, whether we feel we're fit and proper parents. If they remembered every single thing we did, like, would that change any parenting calls we made? Like, I sometimes walk around with my undies on. I don't always get dressed to, bathe her, but I go, oh, if I knew she'd remember all this and have a consciousness of it, would you sort of step up a bit more? I don't know. I just find it really, really interesting because memory is such a pivotal thing of adult life, like, especially as you age and like you start looking back more and more and more. And there's this whole subset of humans that don't have memory for a very formative period of their life, like the most formative period when they're learning to become an adult, learning to become a human, really. And I don't know. What do you think? If you had the option, if you could choose to remember every part of that part of your babyhood, or are you happy that it's just this blur of what your parents may have told you and old photos in very old slide night type old Polaroids and stuff?
I don't know. I don't know if there's anything to be gained from that first 4 years. Like, I feel like anything that any warm memories or pleasant memories I got from my parents, and that's what I can hold on to. I don't know. It feels greedy to me that I need to go back to being cuddled by my mother or something.
Yeah.
I mean, part of me wonders too, like, you're saying your wife takes a zillion photos and we do the same. Part of me wonders if that's going to influence the way Iona looks back at her childhood because it's documented.
I wonder, because you and I probably, I reckon there's probably 12 photos at the most of me as a baby, in the first year. Like, it was especially, I think you went to a studio to get a
or a shopping centre.
You brought lights in. And it was a big, and, it was the box brownie man came and put the cloak over his head. So there's a couple of seminal shots that have formed my memory. And I sometimes wonder, what is memory and what have I just sort of pieced together from a photo? Yeah, kids today, I mean, there's not a lot that's not documented. And if there's a household that doesn't do it, I kind of envy them because I don't sort of lie awake. And I'm not sure if it's an ethically thorny one, but it's definitely a game changer. Like the extent to which children, and I'm talking about babies, not children, like their lives are documented. And we don't post, we don't share, but we look at them the whole time, and she will when she's older, and I imagine she'll be fascinated. I also suspect she'll be a bit bored and go, why did you take so fucking many? It's like, my wife doesn't deliver, there's like 20 of every new outfit. It's crazy.
Every day.
It's lovely.
Just the most,
But it's I don't know, and sometimes, my wife, no, I don't mean this to be we both do it, but you sort of then spend all this time editing or looking at the photos and your child's doing something in real life that's just as amazing that you're missing out on. You're just looking down on your phone. And it's that old joke.
Even worse than that, Chris. I have tried to art direct photo shoots with my daughter. Please, the sunset's amazing. Can you just take a half step to the look at daddy, and then you're like waving your hands about trying to get there. Because this will be amazing. What a perfect shot. Yeah. We all do it.
Well, yeah, we do.
Chris, we better wrap it up there. Thank you so much. The podcast Birth, Baby and Beyond, currently on the Listener app. Is it available everywhere or is it exclusive to Listener?
I'm not the person to ask, Charlie. Let's say Listener. I get a Listener vibe.
Everywhere.
Oh, sorry.
Right.
It's available everywhere.
Fantastic. And please come back on the show. I'd love to hear how things are going once you have a toddler on your hands. That might be a whole new kettle of fish.
Yeah, let's make this like 7-Up, but we'll do it at like
great.
We'll do it at 3-Up.
Every 7 months.
Every 3 years, the geriatrics will get together. You, me, and Osher. We'll see who's still alive.
We'll just be heads in a jar, sci-fi style.
So lovely catching up with you. Congrats on you becoming a parent. And it's really, really, really interesting to hear your insights into something I've been going through as well.
Thanks, Chris.
How long? Not long. Everyone relax. Fucking stupid.
Listener.